If you liked this episode of the Hockey IQ podcast, please leave a like, a comment, and especially review our podcast. If you truly listened all the way to the end and you're listening to this right now, you enjoyed this episode. Please go and give it a 5-star review. That helps us out more than you know. Thank you so much and look forward to the next one.
All right, welcome back. Week 3 of our series here with Will Scouch. We're looking at defensemen. First week, we talked about modern day defending. Last week, we talked about point play, so shorting the zone, why point shots are truly the worst. Point shots just suck. Point shots suck. I mean, everyone knows
The
it. We all know
crusade,
it.
yeah.
We looked at Zach Werenski. He was leading the NHL in goals. He's consistently up there and leading the league in goals from the defensemen. And Will, you had a great study there of just showing like the offensive increases that we've seen have all basically come because of defensemen being more involved in the offense. So it was perfect for our point play piece. Making sure, going into the details, catching with movement, catching in good spots, giving ourselves spaces to operate in, and the common mistake of players, like they start in wide open spaces rather than maybe starting in more congested spaces, but having space to go into. So common mistake there. But this time we're going to talk about defending the rush. So teams turn the puck over. We're now having to play defense. There's that transition moment where we're going from offense to defense, and now just straight we're playing defense. So two ways I think about this when we're playing the rush is one, passive, and two, aggressive. Like aggressive, we have an opportunity to maybe kill the play early. We can really get in the attitude of we play you. Versus passive, maybe we're not in a good spot, or like our team hasn't set us up in a good spot as a defenseman. Maybe there's some kind of scramble, whatever it may be. And then like the third piece I'd love to dive into is just like reading the pinch. So where do we want to start? I feel like this is maybe a good opportunity to start with our main man, Lane Hudson, because I feel like he's someone who has the ability to play aggressive, but often he's pretty passive in his rush defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're dead on with that. I've seen a lot of Lane Hudson over the last few years. I remember when he was a draft eligible kid. I remember watching him in college. Now he's in the NHL. And actually, he's been quite effective on paper in the NHL. I know people are throwing around player cards and throwing around this and throwing around that, but in aggregate, on the whole, so far this season, relative to the rest of the team in Montreal, he's been, for a kid who's again 20 years old, playing upwards of 25 minutes a night. He's doing pretty well. I think that that's asking a lot out of a kid, and he's doing quite well, especially 5'9", with all the question marks people have with players like that. But yeah, I mean, with him, I think he's a really good showcase of how smaller players can play defensively and be a positive impact player, right? There have been, I mean, I wrote for you in the newsletter over the summer, like it's the area where I think in the context of the NHL draft, there is still a lot of work that could be done of discovering some good value, of looking at these really, really mobile and creative guys that may lean a little more offensively, but may not actually, right? Like a great example while we're talking about Lane Hudson, a guy who doesn't score a whole lot, but every single time I watch him, he just does the right things all the time and has done so since his draft years. Tyler Duke. He's in Michigan now, and that kid is 5'10", I think, 5'9", and doesn't score a tremendous amount. But I remember watching him at the NTDP, and I remember a few interviews with his teammates going, this guy is the most underrated guy on the team. He's small, but he works his tail off, just like his brother Dylan. Dylan Duke is having a great year in the AHL too, but that's
Both
besides the
both are
point.
Ohio boys. Just for the
Ohio, yeah,
I
exactly.
I got to rep out the state that I'm
Exactly.
from.
Yeah,
Ohio
yeah.
kids.
Yeah. I mean, hey, I love me some Ohio for sure. But yeah, I think that guys like that and Lane Hudson showcase a lot of the same things, right? Number one, possession is good defense. If the opponent doesn't have the puck because you have it, they're not scoring. So that's number one. And number two, Lane Hudson, I think, does a really good job using his feet to at least put himself in good position to block play from occurring. like we said, staying between the dots, not overcommitting, but not opening up too much of a gap. Um, I think you mentioned surfing off the top of the show, but he is an aggressive neutral zone defender as well. He can track that play laterally, challenge guys with his stick, and force them to make plays and force them to make decisions before the puck even gets in the defensive end. And from there, if you've got good support from your partner or a forward that's back checking, then you're golden. And so to me, it's like little things that you may not notice or that may not jump out at you, but when you watch game after game after game, you kind of go, oh, I see how this guy has got the trust of a coach. I can see how this guy is playing so many minutes relative to the rest of the guys on his team because of the things that he brings, even though he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not perfect. There have been situations where I'm watching Lane Hutson going, well, that didn't really go your way, and that's unfortunate, but
It's
that's
also
any hockey
learning
player.
as a
Well,
20,
yeah,
20-year
yeah.
old rookie defenseman
Well,
at 5'10" if you're
and
lucky.
and that's hockey. Like hockey is a game where sometimes things are going to go your way and when they're not, right? Like if I got upset every time a big physical guy lost a physical battle, then but nobody really does that. Nobody really is concerned when that happens once in a while. So with Lane Hutson, he loses a physical battle once in a while. He's not involved in as many because they often have the puck. And if they don't have the puck, he's doing work in the offensive zone or neutral zone to prevent them from keeping the puck. So there's a lot of good things that happen in his game that I think brought him to this point in the NHL faster than I thought, to be perfectly honest. I thought Hutson was going to take a little bit more time, but he hasn't really looked out of place. And I think he's a really fascinating case study as to guys like him and how they might be able to work.
Yeah. So I think you wrote on this on the Hockey IQ newsletter, so I'm just going to reference it exactly. You mentioned about like Hudson shows off a number of strong defensive moments that highlight his style of blocking offensive zone exits, keeping opponents to the perimeter, and establishing body position on retrievals. Like,
Yeah.
three very translatable things to the NHL. Yes, he's going to continue to grow and fill out. So, he's got more progress. I mean, we talk about the deficiencies in my actual areas of worry, which is more around like a skating base and feet and all that. But
Yeah.
like from a standpoint of can you survive in the league? The answer is yes. Like Victor Mete would be the anti example, I would say, where like, yeah, he didn't have the way of deploying the things that Hudson does. Like the brain wasn't there to the extent that Hudson was while being small. Also a Habs draft pick. So track that one as well for those that want to nerd out. But like there were some great quotes that Hudson had talking about his defensive game. Like, and I'm just going to read them out because I think they're so good, and then we can dive into the details here. And I think it's from Hudson talking about defense. I just think it's more about being in the right spot, being more skillful, and knowing the game rather than just being a big frame. It's about making the right plays and the right reads. Continuing on and talking about like getting into like how does he do that? He says being able to get up in their face, so having great gap control without getting pulled out of position, not overextending yourself, controlling my speed and my gap and my spacing around the inside of the ice to keep guys to the outside.
Yeah.
And it just keeps talking about the things we're talking about, which are playing the game with intentionality, playing it very smartly, basically the opposite of how Rasmus Ristolainen came into the league, which is like, I'm a big body, I'm going to go make things happen. Yeah. And his is just more tactful. Like it's not going to scream at you. And like you said, like he's going to have his moments, but from an overall standpoint, he's going to drive positive results. Like he has the way of playing the game smartly, especially for his size, where it has to be a very intelligent game where he can't make as many mental errors and be able to recover from it. And he's shown so far, like we're off to an absolutely great start.
Yeah, I mean it's like a different side of the coin. Like I talk a lot on my show and with you about players who sort of seize control of the ice when they're on the ice, but that doesn't necessarily mean physical play. It's a lot of other stuff that happens, and I think Hudson's a really good example of what that means, right? And it's everything you kind of said. It's this understanding of the game and this understanding of what your opponents are doing, how to minimize. Really, it's like I'm going to take control of this possession and I'm going to minimize their opportunity to do anything. As many things as as many things as they can possibly try, I'm going to minimize as much of it as I can. And there's ways of doing that that aren't that physical style of play that you see out of defensemen that is unheralded. A lot of it just kind of flies off by the wayside. And I think people look at a guy like Hudson and see the way he plays. And if you have a really strong tactical understanding and really aggregate understanding of what is going on when he's on the ice, both the offensive good, but also the defensive good, you see a lot of really interesting traits there. And so guys like him, like I agree with you that the skating base and the quickness and all of that, like he's not Quinn Hughes, right? Like that's not really his brand. So he has to think of other things and have an understanding of the game that can help patch that up. And so yeah, like the things like gap control and guiding guys laterally and being a little more aggressive are definitely key areas of interest for me. And especially because earlier on in the series, we were talking about how much I love defensemen who can skate and how many doors it unlocks. But if you're not an elite skater, which I don't think I would consider Lane Hudson an elite skater, at least defensively, you have to. It doesn't mean you're automatically not an option. It's just that the equation changes. The things that you need out of that player shifts, and you have to help guide them in the right direction so that they can use what they do have to their best of their ability while the rest sort of develops around them. So it's fascinating to me. It's a really, really interesting thing. And I love seeing guys like Lane Hudson figure it out and play the way that they do, because it just goes to show that he's obviously special in a lot of ways, but it just goes to show that all kinds of different players have a place at the highest levels of hockey. It's just a matter of how you approach the game, how you see the ice, how you manage your behavior, and what you bring to the table.
Yeah. I want to dive into some of these ways to play, starting with just like if you're playing it passively. So say we're just doing our normal, like two defensemen coming back, passive, letting the offense kind of have some space. First step needs to be inside. Like, you need to get inside ice. Like, you need to get good positioning. You need to get within the dots. That's first and foremost. So first step is inside. I've heard a few coaches call it lateral gap. For me, I just say you need to get inside positioning. And really, if I take this to the football field, so American football, Canadian football, think about it as leverage. So you either have inside leverage or outside leverage. So inside leverage means you're taking away the inside. That's where you are, and you're giving the outside. So that's inside leverage. Outside leverage is you're on the outside, you're taking away the outside, the boundary, and you're giving away the inside. Now, question is, like, everyone's like, why wouldn't you always give inside leverage? And that's the most common, but when would you give an outside leverage? When you have help on the inside, like you're pushing them to a bad spot, into a teammate, into support, into someone who's there to help you. But for the most part, we want to be starting with good leverage, or some coaches call it lateral gap, where we're taking that first step inside, getting inside the dots, and being able to passively let them have the bad ice. We may not be in a great spot to finish the play, stop the movement yet, but we're going to put them in a bad spot where they're no longer like an A+ threat that we need to address immediately, like we're in deep doo-doo.
Yeah.
Like, you can poke check out there, like, just don't extend yourself. Like the
Right.
time that you finally get aggressive off of that passive is like, okay, I'm able to get this puck. I'm able to separate. I'm able to get position before possession. I'm able to cut it off, able to seal it off, that kind of stuff. That's when I'm developing my defenseman, that's what I'm talking about with them, is like, if you got to play passive, like, just get inside leverage, unless you have a good reason to play outside leverage, and just let them have the wall until they overextend, whatever it may be, give you an opportunity to seal it off. Like, great example, just be like good poke checking. Like, you're kind of like a cobra. You're wait, and then boom, pounce, rather than overextending. Showing your stick early is another classic terrible example of something you don't want to do, where we call it declaring your stick. You declare where your stick is. You're overreaching stick on puck because some coach told you to go stick on puck, and now you're reaching. You've lost good posture, good balance, good weight distribution. Like, that's bad. So we want to keep all of the good things, the posture, don't want to overextend, but just make sure we're positionally sound
Have you been watching me a beer league? Like, is that what you've been doing here? Is that what the prep is for this show? Because I got to take some notes for sure. Um, but yeah, I agree fully. I think playing passive defense is something that can work. Personally, I think that it's something that is not as successful as being a little bit more aggressive, which we'll get to in a second. But everything you said is to me bang on. If you're gonna do it, you do have to play a little bit more, I guess the word would be cerebral, like a little bit more unpredictable and positionally aware. Be aware of what's going on elsewhere on the ice. You got to keep your head up and scanning in front of you, and really just try to force them into nothing, right? Force them into a situation where they go, well, crap, now I have to rim it around the corner or dump it back to my defenseman and hope that they're there with a drop pass, or keeping them in a position where they're not getting inside space on you or getting the puck through you into scoring areas. Whatever it takes to get that done. I think handedness plays a part in this as well, depending on which hand your defenseman is and what hand the forward is. It just makes things like stick checking both easier or more difficult depending on the situation. So there's all kinds of things to sort of keep in mind with more passive defenders, and it can work. I think a lot of NHL teams still deploy their defensemen a little more passive. They go, yeah, here you go. You can have the defensive zone, but we're not going to give you many options. We're not going to give you so much space that you can pull the puck around us and get in deep with a carry or get around our defenseman with a carry. In my view, I think that it invites a lot of potential for really talented NHL players to do just that, sort of tuck the puck between your feet and the stick, or drop a shoulder, drive down low and make a play. You see more and more of that in the NHL these days. But that doesn't mean it's everybody. And I think that there's still a place in the game for this kind of thing. And it's just a matter of, do you have defensemen who are aware of their surroundings, aware of where their partner is, aware of where the other offensive players are, aware of their positioning, staying within the dots, like you said, and just keeping options as low risk as possible. If you be aggressive, you may suppress risk initially, but you may increase risk down the road, assuming things don't go your way, which again in hockey definitely happens. So it's all a balancing act, right? And that's kind of the thing I love about hockey is there's a lot of different ways to do stuff and they all have trade-offs.
Yeah, I like how you put that. Like, it may be low risk now, but it could be high risk later. Like, where do you want to start making your defensive plays?
Yeah.
Is it in your own zone, or is it higher up the ice? And modern day defenseman is finding ways to, as West Point says, be an active defender. Like, when you're thinking about military doctrine, you're talking about keeping the initiative. Like, who has the initiative? Like, it's super important. Like, even if you're playing defense and you're almost like in a siege perspective where like you're in a fixed position, like you still need to be active, so they can't have free maneuvering. They don't have the freedom of setting up in a good spot to challenge you. Like, you still need to have a way to be active and find ways to keep the initiative in some way, shape, or form, which will lead us directly into our other way of playing defense, which is a little more aggressive, where we're talking about concepts like surfing. So surfing would just be like angling, skating forward. So my personal favorite, I call it the weak side fold. So you got a weak side defenseman. They're able to see the whole play. There's no real threat on their side, whether it be from forward coming back or just no one's really there and they've got good defensive positioning. They're able to go and skate and angle actively over to the strong side to take out the puck carrier, which inevitably ends up chipping the puck right to the strong side defenseman. So weak side fold, boom, pull that over. That means that your strong side defenseman needs to at least get inside the dots, just like they should anyways. If not, start going over to the weak side in case that play does get made there, whether it be an area pass or whatnot. So surfing would be the first concept I think we should dive into, of just like, you're on the offensive blue line, you see the play starting up, rather than skating back and playing it passive, you're skating forward and going to attack the offense.
I love it. I love seeing this deployed all over the place. I think to me, it's the way, if I were coaching a high level team, that's kind of how I would want to deploy the types of players that I would put on a team. So like again, I think a lot of the battle in hockey is understanding who you have on your team, what they can do, and putting them in a position to do what they're best at as much as possible, right? Like not everybody is good at everything, but that's okay. So for me, I look at guys and I go, well, the types of players that I like, this is kind of how they should be utilized. Be a little more aggressive. I love the weak side fold idea. I think it gives a little bit more of a sense of safety because you have that strong side defenseman who can play that more traditional style between the dots, but you're utilizing their partner to cut across the ice and apply pressure. And in my world, again, this is where skating comes into importance and everything. You have, the opportunity to go, yeah, okay, the weak side guy's coming over to the strong side, and you have two defensemen on one side of the ice. That opens up a whole half of the ice where there might be a lot of space. But then I'm going, right, but that's what you have a really good skating center for. That's what you have a really intense, 200-foot winger for. It's why I look at when I look in the draft, I see guys who, are more offensive leaning. I say a lot like you don't get the chance to really produce offensively a whole lot if you don't chip in defensively, at least in my books. And so when I see guys who really, like Zach Benson, for example, we talked about in a previous episode, a guy who did not take a shift off, a guy who covered for defensemen, a guy who chipped in defensively as a winger, and brought a lot to the table that allows him to push play up the ice and be part of that and allows his defenseman to be a little more aggressive. So like that style of play definitely resonates with me. The style of defenders that I always value, those really high-end skating guys that, regardless of their size, those stick first, body later type of defenders, I think it works for those types of guys. And so I love seeing this kind of play personally. I'm a person who I think on the ice is a lot with my strategy and my view of the game. I'm a lot more risk tolerant, I think, than a lot of people. But I think it's because in this situation and in the data work I've done over the years, like no matter which way you slice it, when it all comes out in the wash, generally being aggressive is a better approach than not on paper. Obviously, though, that depends on the types of players you have on your roster. So to me, this is exactly what I want to see out of the game. This is exactly the kind of strategy that I think is sort of a modern development that I think really benefits a good type of hockey player that I love to see more of. So I'm all about it. I'll throw it back to you, but this stuff gets me going.
I can already feel that the passion has risen in Will Scouch.
Well, it's also after 9 a.m. now, so I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah. The other piece here is I'll call it the strong side serve. So that's that inside, like you're getting inside or starting inside positioning. So if either first step is inside or you're already starting inside the dots. And you're able to just surf very short. So rather than a big weak side fold, you're able to do a short surf into the player. Again, position before possession. Feel free to take their head off if, the opportunity presents it. But really, you can do this all over the ice, and finding ways to defend skating forward is a good thing. Like I've yet to find the defenseman that skates better backwards than they do forwards. Like I don't know any player that does that. And it's probably impossible. Unless you're that bad of an offensive skater and you need to absolutely skate backwards to have any ability. So something that we should all try to find more opportunities to skate forward to defend. The other piece with this that I think is super important is finishing with contact and staying on the inside. So going back 2 episodes where we talk about Rasmus Ristolainen, where he would finish with contact or he'd try to finish contact either with, or even if he made it, he was the last guy getting up and the other player ended up on the inside. So if we do go stick on puck, we are doing position before possession. You still need to rub that player out. You still need to hit the player, have some level of contact where you're now jarring them, you're getting in the way, you're limiting their freedom of movement, in which case advantage you and your team. And then making sure we're smartly staying on the inside where we've got to win the race off the wall, where we've got to continuously have inside leverage over the opponent. That's a common mistake I see with guys. We just do stick on puck and that's it. Well, now the other team still has the opportunity to get a second crack at a puck, or they're still very fast to get to it. rather than finishing it, sealing it off. They've got to now restart their speed, restart their feet, all of that, their feet, restart all of that, where they're in a terrible, terrible position. So making sure that, boom, you may have got it, maybe another step or two to ride them into the wall, but that's a step or two well taken.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I don't have any real notes to expand on that, to be honest. I mean, I totally agree. It's a multi-stage process defending like that. And I think that, yeah, like you don't want to give your opponent too many opportunities. You don't want to, overcommit. And I totally agree. I think, again, being a guy who's played defense my whole life, I can attest skating forwards is a lot easier than skating backwards. And so if you can have defensemen who can defend by skating forwards, it's probably going to be easier for them, especially at the NHL level. So, yeah, definitely something that I'll get behind fully, regardless of the risk.
Yeah. The last piece I want to touch on this before we go into reading the pinch, just around like keeping clean feet. One of the best opportunities for a forward to change direction. And this is something that I've been toying around, and it's been absolutely great for my offense production off the rush. It's just like reading the defenseman's feet. One, I got to figure out, okay, where's their stick? Are they declaring it? Or are they not? And after that, like, can I get them to cross their feet? Or are they really good at shuffling? Therefore, they're able to move wherever I move, like be able to respond easily. So as much as humanly possible, defensemen that are playing the rush should be shuffling, not crossing feet. So think about like basketball would be the prime example. Like they do a ton of drills on shuffling your feet. Similar here with defense and making sure we're able to shuffle. So kind of going back to our passive. Now that I'm thinking about this further, making sure that we're not putting ourselves in bad positions to play the rush. So if you have anything on that, feel free to add. Otherwise, we'll go towards reading the pinch.
No, I see what you're saying. I get it. I think that lateral motion is extremely important. And yeah, I mean I don't really have I have no notes on that situation. I think yeah, no. I'm all about all of this stuff. I'm learning lots and yeah,
Yeah.
totally with you.
Prime example of this for anyone who wants to see like Connor McDavid absolutely burn someone on this exact example of like changing direction when the defenseman crosses their feet, like just starts the crossover, would be Connor McDavid, a goal against Toronto where he just absolutely burned Morgan
Oh yeah.
Morgan Riley there. Like
Yep.
it's so noticeable you can't unsee it once you're like looking at Riley's feet. Like as soon as he makes that crossover movement, McDavid changes, boom, and he's behind him already. Like it's insane. So feel free to look that one up if you want to. The last piece here is just like reading the pinch. So this is maybe more of a team component, but seeing more than just your role. Like this is the Rasmus Ristolainen, and like early in his career would just go for the pinch, destroy the guy because he could. Like he's got him. But is that good for your team? Maybe not. So for me, it's like you got to look. Like, do you have help? Where's that help coming from? Like, is your team system to always have F3 high, where it's almost like a left wing lock in the offensive zone?
I mean that's the difference between 2 or a 3-on-1 coming your way or a neutral zone stop. Like that is again, I think that it highlights the importance of mobility from especially your forwards, because if you have a center, let's say, who is maybe caught between the hash marks, in scoring position, your defenseman goes for a pinch and misses. It certainly helps to have a guy who can really skate and help back check and help cover for that. And it sort of mops up for maybe what might be a mistake from the defenseman, or maybe the defenseman thinks they have the support from a better skater. But that absolutely is a big thing. And I mean, it goes back to hockey sense, I guess you could say, or awareness. Being aware of where your line mates are, being aware of where, if I cause a turnover in this situation, who's probably going to have the puck at the end of this, right? Does this guy who I'm about to hit, 20 feet inside the blue line, does this guy have someone directly behind him supporting him who's just going to get the puck after I hit this guy and then just toss it to a breakout option coming up the middle and I'm caught a third of the way into the offensive zone? Like it's like these little decisions. And in the NHL, again, like I go back to my work doing stuff outside the NHL, but the NHL is fast. These things happen really, really, really quickly. And so if you're caught, you can be caught for a while. And so it's about finding and identifying players who can, if they are doing that kind of thing, they are either really, really effective at it, or they cover their own butt really, really well, or they just play it a little more safe, and a little more reserved, and it works out for them in that way. But in terms of reading it, yeah, I mean, awareness is so important. Head on a swivel, peripheral vision type things. It's all super important.
I like your point about like who's going to get the puck once you do smoke this player, like, or if you go for the contact, like
It might not be you,
it may not be, it's probably not going to be you.
Yeah.
So who's it going to be? Like, do you have F3 support? Is there someone on the other team? Like, thinking is always a good thing. I know everyone wants to like read and react, but there is an opportunity and there's time and places where you can make you think, like make some thinking happen where it's like, oh, okay, should I go, yay or nay? Or like team rules, if you're a coach, like, hey, if you have F3, go for it. You think you can get it, go for it.
Yeah.
Or just like
Yeah.
I always like reading the winger. Like,
Right.
did they scan up ice? Like, do they even have an idea where I'm at? If they're like looking directly back at the puck, probably gonna go. It's
Yeah.
their best option is like, oh crap. And when you go, oh crap, rarely do you make the best play possible.
Yeah. No,
Often it's a turnover.
yeah, and I think the point about having support, winger support, makes a huge difference as well. I think, you know, it's a really interesting thing. I mean, all of this whole discussion about defensemen, it just goes to show why guys might take longer to develop, why guys might take longer to play more premier roles in the NHL, because there are so many little details. Like they might have an area of the game that when they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, they hit the NHL and they're comfortable with it, right? That's totally fine. But then, they play game after game after game after game, and opponents start going, okay, well, here's the thing they're good at. So let's try to target blah, blah, blah. But the better that they can be at these little fine details of, monitoring defensive rushes, pinching in the offensive zone and trying to pick the right timing on all of these things, not trying to do everything themselves, but chipping in as much as they can in a positive way. It's all really complicated and like very on the fly considering how fast all this happens in the NHL. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's thinking a little bit more beyond the thing that's right in front of your face, that I think is a huge thing that makes the difference between a guy who may be able to play in the NHL and a really good player at that level. If you have that ability to read the ice, take a good survey of what's going on, not take on too much risk, but take on risk here and there when you see an opportunity to do so. I think you're laughing at this point.
I think the key piece for me and what you mentioned was like you're reading the ice beyond what is directly in front of you.
Yeah.
Like if I had, and I think this may be just a maturity thing as well, but like the more
Yep.
mature a person becomes, the better they are at surveying their surroundings. Like they take in more of the picture. They're not just hyper focused on this is my thing, this is what I do. Just in, life and in hockey. So like just having a better picture of like how does my little detail play into the bigger picture? So like that's a big piece I would say with reading the pinch, and the thing I love that you brought out there. So we got to survey the ice and understand more than just my little piece. Like, is their speed ripping? Like all this guy has to do is chip it, and they're off on a 2-on-1 or a breakaway. Like bad time to pinch.
Yeah.
But if you're not reading beyond the one player that you're trying to pinch on, likely to make a bad decision there. So that
Yeah.
is super critical. Read the winger, read your support, read the whole play.
Yeah.
How does it play
Totally.
into everything? So,
Yeah.
Will, I think this has been a phenomenal series
Oh yeah.
on defensemen. Like I feel like everyone should send this out to their favorite defenseman in the world. Or just send this to your favorite NHL hopeful prospect, or
Yeah,
even just like anyone in the AHL that wants
flood
to
their
get to the NHL.
DMs.
I think anyone in player development at the NHL level should send this out to their defenseman. And if
Yeah,
you're at any kind of level of player development, which is pretty much every other coach, send it out to your defenseman. Like there's no
yeah,
way some of this information isn't one going to get them thinking about how do I play the game better, but
yeah.
two is probably actionable items for them to go and work on in their own game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to find a way as we talk about this and all these little subtleties of playing defense and all the things that kind of go undervalued. I'm trying to find a way to shoehorn Brad Hunt into this discussion, but unfortunately, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. But I think he's just a really good example of a lot of these things going his way, and seems like a beauty of a dude. And I don't know if Brad's a reader of this, I want to have him on the show to talk about his experience as an NHL player because I find him fascinating for a lot of the reasons we're talking about. It's just might have been a little bit ahead of his time. But a lot of this good stuff is there and with him, and I don't know. It was the last thing on my mind before we call it a day.
Beautiful. All right. If someone knows Brad Hunt or Brad, you're out
Yeah.
there. Please reach out.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Will. Have a good one.
Hey, you too. Anytime.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.